What I want to talk about is the question that I keep getting asked all the time. What is this whole referendum all about? What is it that we have to decide on the 10th of April 2019? And many people ask that in different ways, but basically that's what they want to know. And that's what I propose to do. So the plan is that I'll give a presentation about 30-40 minutes, and if I get too long, feel free to stop me. And after my presentation, then I would invite questions, comments, and then we could have a discussion as open and as long as you want. So, the question, what is the referendum about? It's about trying to solve a long-standing dispute, the dispute arising from a claim from our neighbor on our territory. Some people say, well, we don't have no dispute with Guatemala. Like an Anglo-Guatemalan dispute, they say. And Anglo means British. So it can't be with we that we have a problem, that Guatemala has a problem. It's with England. Well, if we look at the Constitution of Belize, at Schedule 1, on the definition of Belize, it says very clearly what our boundaries is. The boundaries with Guatemala is described in the 1859 treaty. And the boundaries with Mexico is described in the 1893 treaty between the British and Mexico. So we have two treaties that describe and define our border. Those are the treaties that establish it. So people say, then what we have, we don't have a problem. We know where our boundaries are. I've heard that said many times. If we know where our boundaries are, then what is the problem? Well, the problem is not with us, you know. We are very clear that we have good title to our land. The problem is that our neighbor contests that title. Our neighbor does not recognize that boundary and does not respect it as an international boundary. Why? Why is that? In the 1930s, when they were surveying the boundary line established by the 1859 treaty, and they were about to finish half of the boundary line, they were cutting the line, marking it, the Guatemalan boundary commissioner got a message from his capital, from Guatemala City, and they told him, do not sign off on that boundary survey. And why? Because somebody had a good idea up in his capital saying, you know what, this is a good time to get something from Guatemala. So they said, we will sign it, but you need to pay us some compensation. And the British said, what kind of compensation? We don't owe you anything. And the Guatemalans said, well, remember Article 7 of the 1859 treaty? You were supposed to build a road, and you didn't build a road, so you owe me. And the British position was, well, we don't owe you anything. That's not what Article 7 provides. And they haggled for a number of years, and they could not reach an agreement. So the British said, let's go to court, and the Guatemalans said, no, we won't go on the basis of international law. You just give us something, give us money or give us land, and we settle it. And they stayed like that for a while, but it was not resolved. In 1945, the Guatemalan government declared in their constitution, they get a new constitution. And they put in their constitution that Belize is part of Guatemala. And they charged their government with recovering Belize, recovering. Yeah? And since then, they started teaching in their schools, Belize es nuestro. Some of you might remember in the old days, even before independence, you had a big map between the border station of Benque Melchor, a big map saying, Bienvenido a Guatemala, and you had a big map of Guatemala showing a part of Belize. And that still continues up to this day. Sometimes we get shocked and we get offended when we see those maps. But that is the reality in Guatemala. In their laws, the 1859 treaty does not exist because they declared it null and void. Our position is very clear. You could tear up the treaty if you want. The treaty might have expired. It does not matter. Once you establish a boundary, that boundary becomes permanent. But Guatemala does not buy that. At least their legal framework does not permit them to recognize that. And that is their reality. Their constitutions changed over the years. They've had several constitutions, and the most current constitution in 1985 still says that the executive, that means the government, still must adopt measures aimed at resolving the issue of Guatemala's rights over Belize. What rights? Rights over our territory. And because they maintain that position in their law, they do not recognize the boundary. In their minds, in their legal establishment, because the 1850 no longer exists, then there are no borders, and everything that followed from the 1859 treaty no longer exists either. It's a legal fiction that they created over the years and that they still maintain. So now, when you see the maps of the rest of the world, it will look much like the one on my right, with the boundaries of the region well established. All the countries in the region have established, does settle it, and the disputes are pretty much over. You still have some hangovers from some of those disputes, but they are generally established. Guatemala, on the other hand, draws their maps with Belize still part of it. And in the part that says Belize, they say territory under dispute. And in respect of our boundary line, they regard it as a line yet to be delimited for the same reasons I described before. So over the years since 1945, the Guatemala and the British first, and now independent Belize, have been trying to resolve that problem because it has created a lot of problems between the two countries. I don't think I need to describe all the problems we've had over the years. But every government has tried to find a way to resolve it peacefully, because that's what international law provides, that we settle our differences peacefully. So, we have, since 1962, been trying to find a peaceful settlement to this dispute. So 56 years up to today, we have been negotiating, mediating, conciliating, and we have reached very close several times to settle it. But Guatemala always back off because they can't sell whatever package to their people. The last time we had the Ramphal-Reichler proposals in the early 2000s, and we were supposed to put it to referendum, and Guatemala backed off afterwards and then rejected the proposals. And those proposals provided that Belize's borders must be respected as we know them. So we have tried several years, and I could list a whole range of things, and that is just a bullet point summary. And they have, I could detail them so much. Every year, every government has tried. Along the way, we have had military threats as well. In 1948, for the first time, Guatemala said, we will recover that territory by force. And that's when the British sent Her Majesty's ships here, and they sent the troops. And since 1948, we had the British soldiers here. And that got repeated several times over the course of our pre-independence. And some of you might remember that in 2016, when the young man, Alvarado, a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, was shot and died in the Chiquibul, the first response from the Guatemalan administration was that they were going to send 3,000 troops to the Petén to protect their citizens from these terrible BDF. The OAS report established that it was not the BDF who shot the young man, but is beside the point for them. So we tried several things, and I won't bore you with all the details of all the efforts. The fact is that we have not been able to reach a negotiated settlement or a mediated settlement or a conciliated settlement, because at the end of the day, Guatemala wants land in a negotiated solution, and Belize will never give them any land. So we could negotiate till eternity, and we will not be able to find a negotiated solution for that reason. We'll never give them land. They want land. That's in essence part of the problem. So while we have been negotiating and while we have been trying to find a solution to the problem, what has been happening? It's important to see, like, aside from the negotiations, you have other things happening around the world too, and even between Belize and Guatemala. That shows the population of Belize and Petén, a neighboring department to the west. In 1981, the red part is Belize and the yellow part Petén. In 1981, we had a higher population than Petén. Petén is a larger territory than Belize alone. We had at the time in 1981 147,000 people, and Petén had 131,000 people. Now that was 1981. Today, how does it look? Today, you see a big difference. Whereas our population has been growing, we have 85,000 people now. Petén has gone up to over 800,000 people. They have more than doubled, more than tripled the population they had in 1981. And even these figures are conservative estimates because they have not conducted a census for over 20 years. So many estimate that the real population is over 1 million. So that is happening right next door to us. And those things we have to bear in mind too when we think about now and the future. Demographic situation will affect us. Now, if you look at that, because I didn't mention Isabal. Isabal is the southern department of Guatemala, in the south of us. Isabal is the yellow line is Petén, the red line is Isabal, and the green line is Isabal, and the red line is Belize. You will see that our show population growth, but Isabal and Petén are growing much faster than we are. Look at a bigger picture of the whole Guatemalan territory, which now have about 16 million people. You have to bear that in mind too, because here I'm just looking at the neighboring departments of Guatemala. Now, the people coming on this side, but it's not only a demographic concern we have. We have problems in the Sarstoon, and don't need to bore you with all of that. You hear it in the news all the time. I will just mention that what you hear in the news is not the only thing that happens in the Sarstoon. Yeah? So if you look at the map, this is the Sarstoon River, and this is the Sarstoon Island in the middle here. Up there where you see one little dot, that's where the BDF have its forward operating base. And then right across from it, across the river, on the southern part, that's where the Guatemala Army has its own forward operating base. And they both look at each other. They can see each other across the river. And the Guatemalan position now is that the river belongs to them. And they would love for the whole world to believe that the river belongs to them. In fact, even in Belize, we hear people saying, Guatemala don't annex the Sarstoon. Well, that's not true if the BDF is still there and patrolling the river every day. You can ask the commanders of the BDF. They are there in the face of hostility and in the face of hardship. Our BDF, I think sometimes we don't give them enough credit. They are heroes every day for standing up for us out there. Every day in the face of that threat and intimidation that they get every now and then. Yeah? But they keep patrolling the river. The problem, however, is when our civilians go there, they harass them. When our friends, Brother Wade and the territorial volunteers and them go, they keep getting harassed. They keep getting intimidated because the Guatemalan position is that the river is for them and that we need to ask permission whenever we go there. Now, we have never accepted that. And whenever they do those such things, we protest. And that is what international law provides for us to do. Absent a face-to-face confrontation, what we need to do is just protest, and we keep protesting all the time. And in the meantime, we have the BDF and the Coast Guard and our law enforcement authorities there. So the problems that occur in the Sarsoon is not only when you hear it on the evening news, on the morning news, or the midday news. It happens all the time. Even when you don't hear about it, it is happening. And similarly, we have problems on the western border. We have the problem of gold mining that occurs every day. Of course, you will hear about it once in a while in Channel 5, Channel 7, and the newspapers. They go there. But these things happen every day. Hundreds of people come in to take our gold. And in the process, they destroy the environment. In the process, they take our wildlife. They destroy our biodiversity. They pollute our waters. The very waters we rely on for most of Belize, the fresh water that flows along the Belize River, formed by the Cal and the Mopan River, those waters come from the Chiquibul. And you know what happens when the forest disappears? The water disappears too. So some people might say, well, that don't affect us because that's so far away. But the very water, fresh water we rely on, depends on these very same places. And that's why we need to protect it. The illegal hunting and so forth takes place. Chate, we had a lot of chate one time. They used to come by the hundreds and hundreds every day to take them away for the illegal trade. Today they don't come for chate anymore. Not because they don't want chate anymore, simply because there's no more left. And it's growing back right now. And you could bet that when it grows back, they might want to come back again for more, because it's a valuable product. It's a very valuable product. And then you have the illegal logging. Illegal logging that, you know, sometimes you say, well, it's just poor people from the other side who are landless, who are in a situation of poverty, and they're looking only for a livelihood. The fact is that what is behind them are organized criminal networks. A poor man cannot afford several chainsaws at a time. When you catch them, you put them through you process them through the magistrate court, through our court system. They pay bail, quite a hefty sum for somebody of little means. And then they go back again and they have another chainsaw. So this is organized crime worth millions and millions of dollars. So organized criminal networks are taking advantage of the fact that our law enforcement authorities and the Guatemalan law enforcement authorities are not cooperating the way we ought to in order to fight transnational criminal networks. And because we're not talking, they take advantage of it. So when they see our patrols coming around the place, they just run to the other side. And on the other side, there's no one waiting for them. And similarly, on the other side in Guatemala, you do have law enforcement authorities that want to do a good job in protecting their environment. We can't just say all of them bad. But the same thing happens when they try to enforce their authority over there. They just run over into Belize and nobody's here waiting for them. They lay low for a while and then they go back. So we keep having that cat and mouse situation that makes it difficult to police the area the way we ought to make our policing effective, or as effective as it should be or can be. We need to cooperate with our neighbors for this thing. And you know, people say, well, it's just a tree. It's just a tree. You don't need to be so harsh in the policing. Well, we do have very strict environmental laws, but there's a reason for it. It's not just because we are all a nation of tree huggers either. You know? Cut a tree today, that tree won't grow tomorrow. That tree will take out before it could grow to maturity, especially the hardwoods, the more valuable ones. So the forest tends to disappear. And if you look at what has happened over the course of time, you have satellite images showing the same era, 1975 and 2007. In 1975, was lush green forest, deep jungle. Remember, as a little boy, I used to go across to Melchor every now and then. Beyond Melchor, it was just deep jungle. They didn't even have a road, not like today. And you go there today, all you see is pasture land. You barely see any trees. And some would say, well, that's their problem, not our problem. Well, it is our problem because if you look at the deforestation, it's moving into our direction. It's moving from the west to the east and from the south to the north, beginning to affect us. And now this picture is only in 2007. Today, 2019, the situation has worsened yet. And as much as we try to police the area, the problem keeps getting harder and harder to manage. And that's why we need to be able to cooperate with our neighbor in order to be more effective in our policing. You see? So these things are happening, and some would say, well, you know what we need to do is just send more BDF out there, send more forest rangers, send more immigration, send more law enforcement authority over there. Of course we need to do that. We need to have proper border enforcement. There's no doubt about that. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But we also should bear in mind that the problems between countries do not get solved by the militaries. That is something that maybe some other cultures or some other nations would resort to, but not peace-loving countries that want to promote development, promote cooperation. So yes, we need to have more law enforcement authorities, but that alone will not solve the problem. You could put the whole borderline full of law enforcement. That alone will not solve the problem that we have. To clarify, I've heard some people say, well, the referendum unit, all they're saying is, you go to court, and what that will do is, it will make all of these problems disappear. That is not what we're saying. I want to make that clear. That is not what we're saying. The problems will not disappear. The problems are there. What we are saying is that it will make it easier for us to manage the situation once we have the problem of the territorial claim of Guatemala off our backs. That will allow us to be able to work with our neighbor, what you call peace dividends. There's so much that comes from having peace, from having cooperation, from being a good neighborliness, having good neighborliness with your neighbor. When you get along with your neighbor, you're okay, you feel safe. When you and your neighbor don't get along, you always have to be more careful than you would normally otherwise be. So those things have to be borne in mind. Now, of course, we have to put more law enforcement authority, and I'll show you more or less what has been done. Traditionally, when the British were here, we had 3 what you call OPs, observation posts out there, 3 established ones. They had been there for quite a while, even when the British were here. And since then, not even since then, just more recently, we have added a couple of them. Every year, every other year, we're adding 1, 2 of them, and so forth. And we continue. Plans are in place to even put more. So some say, well, the government no, you do nothing. Well, the government is doing something. But every time you have to give another $1 million, $2 million to the BDF, you know that that means you give less to health, you give less to education, you give less to everybody else. All of us are from the public service. We know how that works. Every ministry have high demands, right? And there are few resources to distribute. So this is taking place. And then some say, you know what, with this problem with Guatemala, it's just about us getting international support. All we need to do is go out there and lobby, internationalize the problem, let the whole world know that Guatemala, as a neighbor, is not behaving neighborly. And then let the international community force them to recognize and respect the border. The good thing is we have been doing it. Since the 1970s, we have never stopped. When the international community and the United Nations supported our sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence, they never stopped supporting us. And everywhere when our allies meet, they make proclamations, declarations, resolutions, supporting us in the same way. So we have the OAS, you have the Summit of the Non-Aligned Movements that every time they meet, keep repeating their support for Belize's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and they call on our neighbor to work with us along the Sarstone especially in order to develop confidence-building measures. But the thing about international and political declarations is that they are not binding. So whereas our neighbor would hear them and they would not like it when the international community is pointing fingers at them and telling them you're not behaving well, the truth is that they can ignore it. It does not force them to do anything. CARICOM, whenever CARICOM meet, they keep repeating the support for us. Some say, well, we need to do an internationalization campaign, but also we need to settle this thing by going to the ICJ for an advisory opinion. Because if we go for an advisory opinion, then we could kind of hedge with bets, right? We're not too sure how we will fare out, so let's go. We think we can win, but we want to be sure. We want to have a guarantee. So we want to know first what the ICJ would think if we put it to them first as for an advisory opinion. The important thing to know about the advisory opinions is that, one, they cannot be requested by UN member states. They are requested through the UN General Assembly or through the UN Security Council. We can't go to the ICJ and say, give me an advisory opinion. It has to be done by an organ of the United Nations. The next point to know about the advisory opinion is that they are not binding. So you go to the ICJ and you get an opinion that is in your favor. You cannot run with that to the Security Council or to the General Assembly of the United Nations and say, implement it, enforce it. By definition, they are just that, opinions. They have no binding force. They might have strong moral force, but there would be no difference than having a political declaration saying we support Belize's territorial integrity. So yes, it would be good and it would be useful, but it will not solve the problem. Why? Because advisory opinions do not settle bilateral disputes. In order for a bilateral dispute to be settled by a court's judgment, both countries have to agree to go to court. And before they go to court, both countries have to agree that they will accept the decision of the court as binding and final. And that does not apply in an advisory opinion. So it's something you could do, but what will be the effect of it? That's important to know. And why we say that? One, because the rules provide for that. And two, we have examples of countries that have gone that route to the ICJ for advisory opinion. Here, Western Sahara. Anybody here have heard about Western Sahara? When we were campaigning for independence in the 1970s, you had 3 countries that were campaigning along with us, whose independence was delayed, just like ours. We were supposed to get our independence in 1964, but it was delayed because of the claim by Guatemala on our territory, and people were saying we have to solve that first. Similarly, you had Western Sahara that had their neighbor Morocco who was claiming them. And then you had another country, East Timor, who also was in a similar condition. Indonesia was claiming East Timor. Western Sahara decided to go the route of getting an advisory opinion. They went to the court through the General Assembly. The ICJ said Western Sahara has a right to self-determination. And Morocco, you do not own, you do not have title over that land. But what happened? Morocco and Western Sahara, two different countries. The colonizing power for Western Sahara was Spain, by the way. Just like we had England here, Britain, they had Spain, and Spain decided to leave. What happened when Spain, the ICJ had already given its opinion, and the Moroccans decided to do what they called a green march. Hundreds of thousands of people, unarmed civilians, walked into Western Sahara over the course of a few days, over weeks. Just walked in, unarmed. So the Western Sahara armed forces were there waiting for a possible invasion, an armed invasion. But what they get is unarmed civilians. And you know, in the rules of war, you can't shoot at unarmed civilians. So they had to drop their weapons, and they were just flooded by civilians. That's what happened to them in the 1975. Today, this area in purple, velvet, whatever you call it, is occupied Western Sahara. And this area in yellow, or mustard, is the area now that the the Sahrawi people possess and control. And they are divided by a fortified wall, which is this blue line here, over 1,000 kilometers long. And they call it a fortified wall, not because it's a wall the way Mr. Trump wants to build between the US and Mexico. It is a minefield, thousands of miles long, kilometers. And so even if the Sahrawi people want to go back, they can't. They have to pass through a minefield. So they can't take back their country. And every year in the United Nations General Assembly, they keep saying, all the nations of the world say, we support the right of the Sahrawi people for their independence and their right to self-determination. They are nice declarations, just like the ICJ gave an opinion in their favor. But they can't walk with that to the Security Council and tell them enforce it. They are unenforceable. And you don't hear about it much, but what you hear about a lot is the problem between Israel and Palestine. You know about that in the news. That's a wall that Israel in Palestinian territory. The General Assembly of the United Nations said, give us an opinion, ICJ, and they gave an opinion, and they said the Israelis were building a wall illegally in Palestinian land. It hasn't amounted to much. Israel just ignored it and continued doing what they were doing. Many call it now the wall of shame, because every year, the Palestinians keep losing their land. And just as an example of what has happened with Palestine, in 1948, they controlled all of that yellow part. They were divided into countries in 1947. The Palestinian people stayed with 47%, 48% of their original territory. In 1967, they had a war. They don't get along too well. They had a war. And the Palestinian people stayed with only 22% of their territory. Since then, since 1967, they have not really had a war. But today, the Palestinian people only control 12% of what was originally theirs. So people ask, well, how you lose land, you haven't had a war? Not since 1967. Well, what happens is that every day, the Israelis go and squat and settle illegally in Palestine. And then the Israeli army follows them and then take over the land little by little. Some of you might remember in 1994, after the British left their defense guarantee, we started hearing about illegal settlements such as like Santa Rosa, Machakila, and several illegal settlements popped up along our western border. The government of the day had a very hard time to get them out. In fact, that's the reason why the OAS came to Belize. The OAS office in the adjacency zone was put there in order, first, to make sure that we remove the illegal settlers so that these things don't happen, and then to make sure that we could keep our border safe. But the OAS will not solve the problem for us either. So these are real-life situations that happens around the world. I'm not saying that will happen to us. All I'm saying is these things happen and we need to know about them. Now, some people say what we need to do with the Guatemala problem is just go to the United Nations. Just take it back there the way we did before independence, and that will take care of it. United Nations have under Chapter 6 a chapter referring to the Pacific settlement of dispute, peaceful settlement of dispute. And they give us a menu of options what countries should follow when they have problems between them. And the menu of options are these here: negotiation, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, judicial settlement, resort to regional agencies, or other peaceful means of their own choice. Now, of all of those, we have tried them all, except the legal route, either arbitration or judicial settlement. All the others we've tried. Some people say, but wait a minute, you need to go to the Security Council. That, yes, you not try it. The same chapter of the United Nations provides, right here in the same paragraph, the Security Council shall is a very powerful word, you know. It's very powerful. It's not the same as may, it's not the same as could, it's not the same as should. Shall means you have no choice, you shall. The Security Council shall, when it deems necessary, call upon the parties to settle their disputes by such means. By what means? By the means provided up here. The same means we have been through over the years. So if we go to the Security Council, they say, have you tried negotiation? We'll say yes. Have you tried conciliation? We'll say yes. Have you tried the others? We'll say yes. Have you tried judicial means? We'll say, well, we don't try that here. Likely they'll tell us, well, you should try that. Why could we be so confident that they'll tell us try the judicial route? Because the same United Nations Charter provides at Article 36, under the same chapter, Pacific Settlement of Disputes. It said that in making recommendations under this article, the Security Council should also take into consideration that legal disputes should, as a general rule, be referred by the parties to the International Court of Justice in accordance with the provisions of the statute of the court. So that's what the Charter of the United Nations provides. Now, some say, well, if the court was an option, why hadn't we dealt with that before? Well, I had mentioned it before. When the problems first started with the British and the Guatemalans in the 1930s, the British were the first one to tell them, let's go to court. In 1937, in fact, we have the exact date and we have the original letter. When Lord Halifax, the foreign minister of Great Britain at the time, wrote to his counterpart in Guatemala and told him, you know what, we should go to court. This thing we will never solve. If we keep negotiating, we will never be able to agree, because it involves a treaty that you say no good and that I say good. And he said the issues, the reason for the view of going to court, the issues in the present case are essentially of a legal character, involving difficult questions of law and interpretation, and of possible tribunals. The Hague Court, by reason of the authority of its judges and nature of its experience, is, in the opinion of His Majesty's government, by far the most suitable to decide a question of this kind. That's what they wrote to Guatemala way back in 1937. And they kept insisting on going to the ICJ on the basis of international law in the 1930s, in the 1940s, in the 1950s. And Guatemala kept saying, no, 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 not on the basis of law. They said, you know what, I'm willing to go to court, but only if we ask the court to look at this thing on the basis of fairness and equity. Of course, the British said no, because they said, look, if you have a claim, it has to be a legal claim. We won't entertain any other kind of political discussions. And that's how we ended up starting negotiating in 1962 and so forth. The rest is history, as they say. When the ICJ, International Court of Justice, was established in 1945 along with the United Nations, the first case that was going to be submitted to that court is this whole problem with Guatemala. The British wrote to the ICJ and said, we submit to the compulsory jurisdiction of the court on legal matters. Guatemala said no, of course. And why is it that the British from very early on said, let's go to court? Because the court is representative of the United Nations. They are put there, the judges are put there by the membership of the General Assembly. So we are the ones who vote for them. We are the ones who elect them in there. And yes, some people say, well, alone, all white men. It's not true. The president of the ICJ is a Somali, from Somalia. Vice president is from China, a woman. And then you have from all other regions of the world, Uganda, Jamaica, India, and the rest of them. So they are representative of the rest of the world. They are elected by us. And they go through a screening process that I don't think in any other tribunal you go through that screening process that they do. So, why were the British so confident? Say, you know what, let's go to court. The court would have to look at the law and the evidence of the case. And if you look at the law first, what is it that they would need to look at? Should we go to court on this matter? Article 2 of the special agreement, I think everybody have one now. Article 2 provides exactly what Belize and Guatemala have agreed. It says the parties request to the court to determine in accordance with the applicable rules of international law as specified in Article 38(1) of the Statute of the Court. That is the critical part of what we have agreed with Guatemala. Why? Because any claim that Guatemala could bring on Belize, any legal claim, any and all, the question says, any and all legal claims that Guatemala can bring against Belize will be measured against the basis of Article 38(1) of the Statute of the Court. So it's important to know what Article 38(1) of the Statute of the Court provides. And the statute provides, in summary, because they have a longer words there, but the court must decide in accordance with international law such disputes as are submitted to it, and shall apply. Again, that word appears, shall. Doesn't say should apply or may apply or can apply. Shall apply. That means it has no choice but to apply these things. What does it have to apply? First, it has to apply treaties. Then it has to apply international customary law, general principles of law, and they have to look at their own precedents, their own past decisions when it comes to boundary and territorial disputes. That is how the court would have to review this case, because both Belize and Guatemala have agreed that this is the only thing they can look at, nothing else. So the first thing that the court will want to know, should we get there, they'll ask Guatemala, what is your claim? And no matter what Guatemala claims, Guatemala can say, well, we claim the whole territory. Belize says no, it's true. They can claim part of the territory. They could claim an acre, they could claim an island, they can claim a square inch of land. I know sometimes we get anxious because we don't know what Guatemala will claim. Well, on the basis of what we have agreed, it does not matter what Guatemala claims. Why? Because what matters is how it can substantiate that claim with the law and with the evidence. They can claim anything they want. But if they cannot prove what they claim, it doesn't matter what they claim. So, let's say they claim the whole country of Belize. The first thing the court will say, well, you have a treaty to show, because that's what the court will have to look at. Treaties. Do you have a treaty to show that what you claim, whether you claim the whole country or you claim a part of Belize? Show me a treaty that says that Belize is for you, or any part of Belize is for you. Do you have any? And no, sir, we don't have no treaty to show that Belize is no issue. That is the truth. Comes to our turn, because we have to respond to whatever Guatemala claims, we have to respond. This thing is working or what? When it comes to our turn, we will be able to show, but also the 1931 exchange of notes. We have two treaties. Let me use this opportunity to clarify from now that some people get. Can you hear me back there? No? Some people get confused. They think that only the 1859 treaty marks our borders in its entirety. And like I showed you before at the beginning, it's two treaties in terms of the one with Mexico and the one with Guatemala. But in respect of the claim, the Guatemalan claim, it is the 1859 treaty supported by the 1931 exchange of notes. So we have two treaties to show we have firmly established our boundaries with Guatemala. Some people say, well, we not trust anything. We not trust the court. What if the court decide to just ignore that treaty? And then Guatemala could claim other things. They could claim they inherit this place from Spain and the rest of it. Well, the next thing that the court will have to look at, remember they shall look at these things, they'll have to look at international customary law. And what does international customary law refer to? It refers principally to possession. Who has been living and occupying this place for so long? And we know the answer to that. It is us, and before us, the British. Now some people will say, well, but the Spanish were here. Of course Spain was here before. Nobody disputes that Spain was here before. But then again, the Mayas were here before the Spanish too. But all of those things will not have any bearing on this case, because this dispute is between Belize and Guatemala. And we also know that since 10th of September 1798, Spain never tried to enforce its authority over Belize. That is why we celebrate the Battle of St. George's Key. Now, some people may argue, well, it wasn't a battle, it wasn't a war. Maybe it might have been a little skirmish, or maybe no shot was fired. All of that is beside the point. What matters about the Battle of St. George's Key is its symbolic meaning and historic relevance, that after that fact, Spain never tried to come by these areas again to enforce its authority. So they left the British alone, left the baymen and the freed slaves. So we have had possession of this land for so long, and Guatemala cannot show any evidence of them exercising administration, jurisdiction, or control over any part of Belize. Not Guatemala. Remember, Guatemala got independence in 1821. The British were here long before. So that is what the court will look at in terms of customary law. And then general principles of law. Really, the big one is the principle of self-determination. Something for which the whole international community supported us and continues to support us.
And bear in mind that self-determination comes with it territorial integrity. That's why when you hear those resolutions of the United Nations and other bodies, they say we support Belize's right to self-determination with territorial integrity. They come together. You can't have a country without a territory. And then finally, judicial decisions. The court is bound to look at their own precedents, their own rulings, and they will be guided by it. And the truth of the matter is that whenever the court has looked at boundary and territorial disputes, they have been consistent in one thing. A boundary, once established, has a life of its own. The stability of boundaries is one of the pillars of the international legal system that we live in today. Without the stability of boundaries, we would have far more wars than we have today. So, that is the law. That is the law that the court will be guided by. And then you have to look at the evidence. You have to look at the evidence. That's important. You can't just have an academic debate about the law. You have to show the evidence. We have the 1859 treaty. That's a photograph of the original. It's still kept in the United Kingdom. It was written in Spanish and English. Those were the days before typewriters and word processors and computers and so forth. And they still have the seals. They used to use a nice wax seal. Some of us public officers who have been around long enough will remember the days when we still used to use the wax seals here in Belize. That's what they used then. And then we have the ratification document. We all know that when you sign a treaty, the minister goes abroad and signs it. But it has to go to the Senate. The Senate debates it. They take a vote, and the majority say yes, then it becomes law. That is what happened with the 1859 treaty. And then what did it do? What it did is it defined the boundary. And those are the pillars that it marked. Gracias a Dios, Garbutt's Falls, and Aguas Turbias. From the mouth of the river Sarstoon to Gracias a Dios, to Garbutt's Falls, to Aguas Turbias. And in each of these places, there's a boundary pillar that was put in place, not just by the British. The first two, Gracias a Dios and Garbutt's Falls, the boundary pillars were put there by the British and by the Guatemalans. And then the one up here, Aguas Turbias, was placed there by the Guatemalans and by the Mexicans, not even the British. I have heard some commentators say, well, Aguas Turbias is in the wrong place, so we might lose some land over there. Well, you know who put that up? The Guatemalans and the Mexicans. And we have never recorded a protest note from Guatemala that it is in the wrong place. We have some Belizeans saying it is in the wrong place. But should we go to court? The evidence shows that since that border monument was placed there, it has been respected by the three countries, Belize, Mexico, and Guatemala, without protest. So that is what the boundary treaty provides. And then we have the map. The original map we still have that was put together by boundary commissioners of the Britain and of Guatemala. And if we zoom into what it says, Henry Way signed it, by the way, for the British, Captain Royal Engineer and Major Boundary Commissioner, Manuel Cano Madrazo, for Guatemala. And what did they sign? We certify that the boundary lines shown in this map are correct. And it gives you the coordinates of Gracias a Dios and Garbutt's Falls, which they put in place first in 1860 and 61, and then they put it again in 1929. So we have these original maps, and see Garbutt's Falls there, they marked it there, and then Gracias a Dios down here. And a very interesting thing, I don't know that you could see it from the back, but if you look at the Sarstoon River, this is the Sarstoon River here. There's a line here, a solid red line, and right on top of the line you have a little island, the only island on the Sarstoon River. The boundary commissioners surveyed the area and determined That is, they both agreed, they both settled the issue of who that Sarstone Island belongs to. They agreed that it is in the Belize side of the border. So we've known that ever since. Guatemala chooses to ignore all of these things, but this is our evidence, part of our evidence. And then we have the monuments themselves. This one is the one right by Benke, dividing Benke and Melchor, right behind the OAS office. Was put in place in 1929. That's, you see the Mopan River behind there. Imagine now what judges of the ICJ coming around, because they do visit the places that they're looking at, that they're reviewing. They do visit. And imagine going there and somebody telling them, well, I put it there, but I didn't mean to put it there. Well, it's been there for so long. And then you have the next one at Gracias a Dios. And then this is, we visited Gracias a Dios by the Sarstone River, and then you have some officials there from Guatemala. So they know it's there. They put it there. But they can't go back to their country and say, I visited the Boda monument, because in their country it's illegal to talk about a boundary with Belize. Actually, they would get in trouble, most likely. But they know it's there. They just can't admit publicly that it is a Boda monument. And at the top, it says Guatemala on one side and British Honduras on the other. And then the main line passes north to south along this center point. Now, we have all of that, and we have the letters, and I won't bore you with it. I'll just give you examples of what I said the court would have to look at their own precedents as well. And remember that Guatemala's, one of the main arguments that they bring is that they inherited this territory from Spain. They claim to have what they refer to as historic title. It's a historic claim. And the court has looked at cases where countries go and say, we have historic title. And I'll read just this part for those who can't see it from the back, because it tells you what how the court regards historic claims. This is a case between Indonesia and Malaysia. Indonesia claimed that part of Malaysia was theirs. They inherited it from their colonial past. It said, this is the ICJ saying it, modern international law does not recognize the survival of a right of sovereignty based solely on the historic title. Not in any event after an exercise of self-determination conducted in accordance with the requisites of international law, the bona fides of which has received international recognition by the political organs of the United Nations. That sounds like us, Joe. We have exercised self-determination and recognized by the United Nations. It continues, against this, historic claims and feudal pre-colonial titles are mere relics of another international legal era, one that ended with the setting of the sun on the age of the colonial imperium. Some poetic and all. These judges believe so strongly in this position that they get inspired and all how they write it. But basically what it means is, look, you can't come to my court and claim historic title over anything. We live in a world of self-determination where countries are born free, people are born free, where they're entitled to live as they please under their own laws, under their own governments of their choosing. That is the system under which we live in with the United Nations. And that is what the ICJ has emphasized over time. So it's relevant to our own case, because our neighbor says they inherit this thing. Well, I have no other proof than to just say it. Then you have another case, Libya, Chad, they were fighting, they had a war like for 20 years and they fight. 20 years. And quickly, it says, once agreed, the boundary stands for any other approach would vitiate the fundamental principle of the stability of borders, the importance of which has repeatedly been emphasized by the court. And it continues, a boundary established by treaty thus achieves a permanence which the treaty itself does not necessarily enjoy. When a boundary has been the subject of agreement, the continued existence of that boundary is not dependent upon the continuing life of the treaty under which the boundary is agreed. In essence, what I said earlier. You could tear up the treaty. The treaty could expire. It does not matter. You agree a boundary, that boundary becomes permanent, whether you like it or not, whether the treaty expires or not, whether you declare it null and void or not. So that's what the court has said. So, should we go to court? What we expect is that the court will look at the law and then tell us what the law says. Something which we feel very confident, what the law says, but our neighbor does not accept it. And the whole point is for it to settle the whole boundary issue and the maritime limits. In summary, Guatemala's claim must be based on legal arguments. They must make all their claims to land, islands, and sea. And the ICJ will examine the law and the evidence and determine whose position is right and whose position is wrong under international law in respect of our boundaries. And the whole point is to make sure that after this there are no more claims. The decision of the ICJ is final. After this, whatever claim has been hanging over our heads, there will be no more of that. So
Why not?
I won't, there's a little thing there, but I'll just go on to what we agreed in the special agreement. Guatemala has said, look, I've seen all of that, but my constitution does not allow me to accept those things. If I agree to anything like that, I'll be in trouble with my own people and my own laws. We need a higher authority. And the only authority that can tell Guatemala, this is the boundary. This is what you have to respect and recognize, is the ICJ. Only they can do that. They have agreed, Guatemala has agreed, all right, we will mark out the boundary, but first I need the court to tell me. So we have agreed that 3 months after a court ruling, the demarcation of the entire boundary will begin. Something that has never been done before. We have marked together parts of it, but not the entirety of it. And with this we will get international support. So, what are they doing there? These young people are there because whatever decision we have to make will affect them. We might be the ones who will exercise our right to vote on the 10th of April, but it won't affect us, only us. It'll affect them too. This issue is bigger than you and me. I know some people have even thrown party politics into it. It's bigger than any political party. It's bigger than any of us. We can settle this thing by going to the court peacefully, or we can choose to just kick the can down the road. Just kick it down the road. Let the other young people deal with it. Our choice on the 10th of April is according to the options being put out there. One, we do nothing. We ignore the claim, pretend that the claim does not exist, pretend we don't have a problem with our neighbor. Just ignore it. Like some said, a problem between Guatemala and Britain, not with us. People who believe that will vote no. And if that's what you believe, I suppose that's how you will vote. Some people say we should negotiate more. We've been negotiating for so many years, but some people say we should never put an end to negotiations. In that case, then people would vote no too. People say we should try other ways to get Guatemala to respect our borders, like, for example, internationalize the issue, lobby the international community to support us more. Some believe that that would be effective. Some say, let's go for an advisory opinion of the ICJ. In that case, they would say no to the ICJ, and on the 10th of April, they would vote no. Another option Belizeans have is to go to court now. Just go to court now and end the claim. Finally, now in this generation. And if you are one of those who believe that that is the right thing to do, then you would vote yes. So that are the options Belizeans have today. Now, we could choose let them deal with it, or we could just say, you know what, we don't have to worry about this now. The question is very simple. They say it's complicated. The question is very simple. Settle it now, finally, once and for all in court or not? Yes or no? It's a big decision, but it's not complicated. It's very simple. End it now or postpone it for another time.
In terms of precedents, in terms of judgments that were passed down by the ICJ, I want to know, are there any situations where judgments were handed down and the parties that were involved, were they, in terms of respecting the judgment, is there any precedent sets where one party did not accept the judgment and basically
Ignore the judgment, you're saying?
the judgment was passed down, but either parties did not respect the judgment and basically reigned havoc over the other country.
Implementation. Yeah. There's been a lot of criticism of the ICJ because they say the ICJ can't enforce their decisions. Well, that is not the mandate of the ICJ to begin with. The mandate of the ICJ is to look at the law and the evidence and make a decision. The body and the authority that is charged, mandated to enforce ICJ decisions is the United Nations Security Council under Article 94. They are the ones who give effect to ICJ decisions. And under the Charter of the United Nations, to begin with, just being a member of the United Nations, just by being a member, you have already accepted that you will respect the decision of the court. And the reasons why, like in this case, we have to have a referendum, and in Guatemala they had to have a referendum, is because we wanted to be sure that when the ICJ rules, the people would have consented to going to the ICJ. That's why in Guatemala, Congress voted for it, and the people voted for it. Now, when the court rules and one party refuses to abide, then you go to the Security Council. Now, in terms of the history of implementation of the ICJ, you have many cases where when the court rules, somebody upset, one of the parties are upset and they say, no, I won't respect it. A famous case was Nigeria, Cameroon, for example, Nigeria being the big country in Africa, the most populous country. And Nigeria said, no way, I won't implement that. I won't respect it, I won't abide by it. But just like the other countries who have had rulings that they are not happy with, at the end of the day, they do comply. They do implement the decisions. So the history of implementation of ICJ decisions is a very good one. In fact, I can tell you that no party to a dispute that has gone to the ICJ has had to resort to the Security Council. Well, there's been one exception, Nicaragua, when the ICJ found against United States. And the United States said we will not comply. Eventually, the United States complied. But the Security Council did not have to intervene and has not had to intervene in any decision of the ICJ for its implementation. It takes a while sometimes, but they all have been implemented or are in the process of being implemented. Is there one here?
One day I went into school and the teacher was asking me if I know about it. And then I tell him yes. And then he was asking me a lot of questions. And you know, in this country, we have people that have education and some of them don't have. And he was saying the ones that they don't have education, who would teach them about it? Because if you don't have education, you wouldn't understand what they're talking about. So who would help them to understand what you're teaching about?
It's a very good question. The truth of the matter is, all of us who understand the subject, who understand the issue, have a duty and a responsibility to help those others who do not understand. So I know some people like to say, well, these are the referendum unit responsibility, these are government or belief responsibility. We all have a duty to help out and to share in the knowledge of our country. We could cry over the spilt milk, the fact that our educational system has failed us when it comes to this whole issue of the Guatemalan claim. A lot of these things I didn't learn in school. We had to learn afterwards, and we had to do our own research. Now we are going around the country. We are going around the country in a public awareness campaign, and wherever we are invited, we go. And we try to have sit-downs. It's a pity we couldn't sit down today and just have a nice little discussion. The format here was slightly different. But we have been going to villages all across the country, meeting with people, meeting with the villagers. Sometimes we have the translations done in Quechua, in Maya, in different languages. I've had a presentation where we've had 5 languages. It kind of takes longer than one would want to, but we want to make sure that everybody understands. And it's important that people understand as much as possible. But the truth is that it is not so complicated when you look at the decision that one has to make. I know there has been a lot of misinformation going out there, and sometimes that does not help. There has been a misinformation campaign out there, some people trying to put in some twists in our history, some twists in the law, some twists in the arguments, and that does not help for people to understand. So we have to be careful. Like they say, when you go to the market, you check your change. When people tell you something, you double check it, you know. You ask them for the source. And you find out, you ask more questions. Asking questions is important as we go along. And on the other hand, what we've been doing too for some time is working with the Ministry of Education to ensure that these things are included in our curriculum in the schools. Now, sometimes that takes longer than we would want to. We work in the public service, so we know how the pace is in the system. But that is already being included in the primary schools and the high schools that are being introduced now as part of the curriculum. It's a pity we didn't do it earlier, but we have to deal with what we have, no?
Hello. Hi. I just want to clarify something and then ask my question. Your last slide, you had 4 options presented up there. And you said if people believe this, they'll vote no, and if they believe the last one, they'll vote yes. But on the ballot itself, there isn't 4 options. There's just a yes or no. Yes, you go, no, you do not go. Correct?
Here I was trying to describe what people have been saying out there, what people have been promoting, what people have been suggesting. But at the end, the question is whether we should go to court to end the claim on the basis of international law. Okay. Yes or no?
That brings me to my question. Considering that Guatemala has already voted yes, and let's just say hypothetically Belize votes no, do we get a second chance at the apple? Can we then turn around 5 years later and say, you know what, now we're ready to go? And would Guatemala meet that agreement, or this is the only shot we have? We decide, yes we go, no we go, because they're willing to settle now.
You're asking me to predict the future.
I'm asking you what you think.
But it's a good question.
Some people think that they have other options.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. To begin with, you have the domestic political scene. If people say no, political leaders in the near or distant future will have to consider very carefully if they want to put the same question to the Belizean people. The Belizean people having already stated their position. But that's a political decision. Now, on the other hand, you have our neighbor. Remember, it takes 2 to tango. And this agreement to go to court is an agreement that we did jointly with our neighbor. Now, how will they react? How will they respond should we say no? Nobody could really predict. But it is in their right to say, well, you don't want to go, your people don't want to go, so that was our opportunity to go. and then elections are coming up in Guatemala in June. Who can predict what the new administration will say? How they will view this thing? It is possible that the letter they sent to the ICJ, because they have written to the ICJ already. You know, when they got a yes in Guatemala, President Morales announced to the Guatemalan people and to the world, he made a public statement saying, Guatemalans have chosen peace. We want to let the world know that we want to settle our problems peacefully. That is the message they send to the world. If we say no, that is not the message we want the world to get. And we don't know how the world will react. But the new administration in Guatemala could equally just say, well, the letter I sent you back then, because these people said no, then I just take it back. It is possible. We don't know. We don't know, or it is possible that the next administration in Guatemala will say, well, let's leave that there, and we retain our commitment to settle it peacefully at the ICJ, and wait till Belize ready to go. It's possible. We don't know. So I can't give you a straight answer because it's a matter of forecasting and prediction that's pretty hard.
Tess, yeah. Good evening. As a public officer, I must say that the information and the script is well put together, and you're almost like a good evangelist. But, well, not almost, you did a good job, and the information is good, convincing. But I would want you to speak about, you came close, Nicaragua, Colombia, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and that would help to assist to answer the concern that the colleague had at the back, because I too have that concern. And also, some Belizeans will have the concern of what impact would the Maritime Areas Act have on our case. So maybe you could speak about that.
Just as a background, Nicaragua and Costa Rica have gone to the court like 3 times over 3 different things in respect of their boundary along the San Juan River. And the last judgment of the ICJ was in February of this year. And in fact, the ICJ even gave compensation, ruled that Nicaragua had to pay compensation to Costa Rica for environmental damages. Now that is something that is very attractive when you're looking at the possibility of claiming compensation for environmental damages. You know, in the discourse here in Belize, we've been saying, but Guatemala deserved compensation from the British. Well, what about us having rights to claim compensation for the environmental damages that are being done every day? Well, that's a different thing. I get distracted. But the ICJ ruling was implemented and is being implemented between Costa Rica and Nicaragua. In international law, countries have a right of passage, like with the Maritime Areas Act in the sea. That's why, since the 1970s, even before the Law of the Sea Convention, governments of Belize had known, way back in the days of Judge Price, we have known that Guatemala and Honduras blocked Guatemala. Here it is. They blocked Guatemala from access to the sea. So Guatemala would have to have a right of access under international law. And that's why under the Maritime Areas Act, this is Guatemala here, if you could see the thing. And their port is here, and their boats have to go this way. And oops, what happened? They have to pass through a channel, and their mercantile vessels have to pass through there, and they're very close to our median line. Some people like to confuse the fact that when we pass the Maritime Areas Act, we give away sea to Guatemala, and that is not the case. What we did is we maintained our rights up to the median line, but restricted our claim to territorial sea, and the rest was subject to a negotiated settlement, which never occurred. So we would, if we go to court, we would have to amend our act to claim our full rights to the sea. So yes, countries are entitled to navigational rights. If it's territorial sea, to innocent passage, and if it's to exclusive economic zone, then they could just pass freely. I hope I answered your question. All right. Thanks.
Okay, good evening. Excellent presentation. What I want to take considerable and a very serious note of the fact that hypothetically, if through the referendum Belize does vote for yes and Guatemala and Belize go to the ICJ, the ruling of the court will take several years. I don't believe it's an overnight case. In the interim, though, what concerns me the most is that we have already have the threat of the fact that they have taken over the Sarsoon Island, and we still have issues with the environment, that we still have illegal logging. We see that they're taking our gold and what have you. What is the government going to do in the interim before that decision is made? Because the way how I see it is like, yes, we're waiting on the ICJ to support us, but for right now, we still have these issues with incursion, and it's like it's open. It's like an open door for them to continue to do what they're doing, and we're not doing anything to protect our resources. What do you say to that?
Thank you for that question. Very, very important. The ICJ has a thing called provisional measures that they can rule on from the beginning of the case. So, for example, our neighbor is behaving very badly along the Sarsoon, claiming that the river is theirs and harassing and intimidating our people and so forth. The first day of going to court, we can apply for an interim measure, what in the domestic law they refer to as an injunction or something like that. Yeah, until such time as the case is resolved, you take provisional measures. So that is one of the good things about going to the ICJ that could be implemented now. You don't have to wait till the end of the court. One example, when Costa Rica, going back to the case, Costa Rica and Nicaragua went to the ICJ. Costa Rica applied for provisional measures for the Nicaraguans to withdraw their troops from an area that was under dispute. And Nicaragua had to withdraw their troops, even though Nicaragua said that is my land, my territory. Nicaragua, because the reason they went to court is because Nicaragua sent their troops into an area, Harbor Bay, I think they call it, and they put up a base there. And then the court ruled on a provisional measure that they had to withdraw until such time as the case is resolved. Well, if we have the opportunity, we have to take it. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. But we have to get there first. You see? I have a question here.
Good evening to all. Ambassador, before I came to your presentation, like many Belizeans, I was confused. And I was confused mainly because of what the mass social media was feeding me. They were saying that this was not an ironclad case, and that maybe if we don't lose all Belize, we can lose maybe half of Belize. Instilling that fear in us, so I didn't know if to say yes or no. But after seeing your presentation, seeing all the facts and the evidence, now I know that I can make, as a Belizean, a conscious decision that the right thing to do is to go to the ICJ. And now I can see that all they are doing is fear-mongering and appealing to my ignorance. But now you have enlightened me, you have educated me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening.
What I can see now, just a little thing. All Guatemala have is a historical claim. And according to our traditional law, that is not even an issue nowadays. That is not even a general principle. They cannot use a historical claim to go at us.
That's right. You saw the judgment of the court on that when it comes to historical claim.
Good evening. I would want to be informed on, we said this dispute is between Belize and Guatemala, but what are the possibilities of a third-party intervention?
Sorry?
Or a third-party interfering in this matter?
A third-party intervention in the case? Should we go to court? It is possible that Honduras, like when we had the Ramphal-Reichler proposals, the facilitation process, the conclusion and the recommendations of the facilitators at the time was made possible with the full participation of Honduras, who have a maritime space to delimit with Belize and with Guatemala. They have not finalized their delimitation. So we encouraged them to join us at the time because it was based on a negotiated settlement. Now, going to court, it is up to Honduras to decide whether they want to apply. And we will have to be careful there too, because we can't just accept them just for accept them. Our purpose in this case is to settle the Guatemalan claim. We don't have so much problems with Honduras. Honduras has a dormant claim on the Zapodillas, but they have never really enforced it or make noise about it. But really, this case is about Belize and Guatemala. So it is possible. It is not automatic, though. Both countries have to agree, who are at the court, and also the ICJ. And it depends to what extent they would be willing to contribute to the decision of the case. Anybody else?
Hello. Ambassador, I want to thank you for your presentation as well. But my question is in regards, I think you probably might have answered it already, but I'm concerned about the special agreement. I want to know if, because Guatemala has already voted yes, are we in somewhat a bind to vote yes? But what I'm asking about it, because I want to know, you mentioned about Guatemala Congress and their president and different things. How binding is the special agreement for both countries? If Belize votes yes, and because Guatemala has already voted yes, can one country just decide to ignore the referendum, the yes vote, and just decide to?
You mean like if a yes or a no comes out in Belize?
No, let's say Guatemala have already voted yes, Belize vote yes as well, but it is based on the special agreement to go to the ICJ, but can any one of the country, I want to know how legally binding is the special agreement. Can we now say that, or any country can say, but we don't choose to go to the ICJ again, the dispute still linger on, and is the special agreement binding for both countries?
Well, bear in mind that what we committed to in the special agreement is to go to court subject to the will of the people. If the people in both countries say yes, we have an obligation under that agreement to then follow up with the people's consent to go to court.
Why I ask? Because I remember that there was a date set at both countries to go on the same date or have the referendum, and I know that Guatemala changed that date and had their referendum on a separate, and now we're having it on a separate.
You're talking about the change of date.
All right. So I want to know if that means that was a breach of the agreement, and can likewise, because, well, how legally binding is the results of the...
Understand. You know, in 2013, when we had the date already set, we had started a public awareness campaign way back from 2012. And we had a big launch with the leader of the opposition and the prime minister at the time, and we were at Radisson for a judge. You still have pictures and so forth. And since then, we have never stopped our public awareness campaign. Very low profile, but it has continued, never stopped. Guatemala decided that they will abort their referendum. So we had a big decision to make. Do we tear up the special agreement and proceed with ours and then just say, well, we're going to the ICJ anyways? The problem with that was that if we go on the basis of just us going unilaterally, it would not then be according to the special agreement, because the special agreement provided that we had to go simultaneously. So Guatemala back off, and I know it is said out there that we had to appease Guatemala we wanted to appease them so much that we changed that part of the special agreement. Actually, it's totally the opposite. Because Guatemala had backed off on an agreed date, we said, you know what? You fooled me once, but you now fooled me twice. We also suspended our referendum, but we tell Guatemala, if you're serious, you go first. That was our position. That was not Guatemala's position. And I know the way they put it out there is that we just appeased them, so we changed that part of the special agreement. Prime Minister Barrow was very clear. They back off on one and you want to tell me again to set a new date? We can't just agree on them on a date and then they are back off again. What will happen? So he said, you go first, we will change, we will amend the special agreement and make sure you go first. And with international pressure and international support, they went ahead of us. Right? So the protocol provides that we can go simultaneously or on separate dates. So we are still following the special agreement, but it is the protocol, which was signed and ratified by both parties.
Thanks.
Now, I just want to make clear, and it is relevant to the same question that was asked from that side too, that it is possible that having said yes over there, it is possible that they could withdraw it as well. Yeah, because if we say no, then there's no guarantee that they won't withdraw it again. Now, if we say yes, the court process begins within 30 days. And once the court process begins, you can't back off. Because once you have started a process in the court will just proceed non-stop. Whether you choose to participate or not, the court will continue. Yeah?
Yes, good evening, Ambassador. Thank you very much for your presentation. My question is as it relates to litigation risk, because you keep hearing it coming up over and over again. What does Belize have to lose as compared to what Guatemala will gain? That's the first issue. The second issue is that the young lady mentioned the fact that, and you said we don't want to over spilt milk, but I think it is important that we do, given the fact that when I was going to high school back then, there were nothing in our history on Belize, Guatemala. Asad Schumann wrote the 13 chapters, and that was done then. At some point in time, in moving forward, this has to be part of the conversation to be able for people to understand this issue. 60% of this society have primary school or less. We have some work to do to be able to educate our people. But the opportunity cost of going, yes or no, versus the fact that Guatemala may gain half of the country as compared to the fact that what we have to lose, though. That's my question.
I know it's an easy thing. It's a very easy thing to repeat. We could lose half our country. Yeah, you know where that comes from? That comes from Guatemala propaganda. We could lose half our country. On what basis? On what basis? Guatemala's position is that they can claim half of our country because in the old days, Spain and Britain agreed that the British would be able to cut logwood up to a certain point, which is from the northern frontier. Then time they hadn't established a frontier with Mexico. From the northern frontier up to the Subun. And Guatemala's position is, the rest we inherit. But we go back to the question, on what basis can you claim you inherited it? You know, when Guatemala got its independence, I'm sure some of you are still old enough to remember our own independence. On the 20th of September, 1980, at midnight, in Battlefield Park, Belize City. Or is it Memorial Park? Which one? Memorial Park, Belize City. Prince Michael of Kent visited representing Her Majesty's government. At midnight, they bring down the Union Jack, fold it nicely and neatly, and handed it over to the representative of Her Majesty's government, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Here is your flag, please take it home. And then they put up the Belize flag. For the first time, the Belize flag flew high and proud, symbolizing our newfound freedom, being an independent country. That is part of our history. We lived it. When Guatemala became independent, you know what happened? Spain was no longer around here. They were so caught up in turmoil in Europe that they had abandoned the area. So it was easy for them to say, we declare our independence. Spain didn't even notice. And what is the relation between Spain and Guatemala? Well, they ignored each other for many, many years after Guatemala declared its independence. They established diplomatic relations only in 1863. When we signed the 1859 treaty, 1859, we had already agreed boundaries with Guatemala when Guatemala and Spain established formal diplomatic relations. So what inheritance they could claim? They can't claim an inheritance. They can't claim that half of the country is there. They don't have anything that said from Spain, Guatemala, they hand you this territory. Why is it then that El Salvador and Honduras and Guatemala and all of those Central American countries were fighting over their boundaries? Because under colonial Spain, there were no established boundaries. None. That's why they end up having wars about their boundaries. Yeah? So Guatemala could claim whatever they want. It does not amount to nothing because historic claims have no basis under today's law. And when it comes to litigation risk, we go back to this thing, 1859 treaty and 1931 exchange of notes. Like in the Libya-Chad case, that's all the court looked at. Treaties, done. Libya came up with all kind of thing about I inherit this thing and I had people living there and so forth. It did not matter. It stopped right after treaties. And it's most likely what the court would do should we go there because our evidence is solid. But even if, talk about litigation risk, even if, for argument's sake, the court chooses to ignore the treaty, then you have customary international law. So when you talk about litigation risk, the court would have to be blinded to the treaties. They would have to be blinded to the fact that we have been living in this place for so long, peacefully enjoying these lands. They would have to totally miss the fact that the whole international community supports Belize's right to self-determination with territorial integrity for us to be an independent country. Those are the facts. And then, lastly, if you want to insist on litigation risk, they would still have to ignore the fact that they themselves have said, the same ICJ judges, the court over time, not one time, many times, has said a boundary once established has a legal life of its own. No matter if you tear it up, if you declare it null and void, if it expires, it does not matter. So people talk about litigation risk and it sounds like a pretty word. But really when it comes to the law and the evidence, there's not much there.
Good afternoon, Ambassador. Good afternoon, fellow public officers. Ambassador, I just want to make two comments on the presentation that I believe were not necessarily balanced. You spoke about the forward operating base and the Sarstoon and whether or not it had been annexed. And you showed...
Sorry, whether or not it was what?
Annexed. I think you made that statement, right? My problem with that, whereby you said that the BDF is there, is that it does not change the fact that the BDF cannot patrol at their own free will. So, if it is our property, why is it that we are continuing to follow a protocol established by Guatemala, who refused to establish a protocol with us, whereby our soldiers are able to patrol without requesting their permission. And so while I could appreciate that we're still there, I think that it's important that we also expand that discussion to say yes, but they still have to request permission. That's a comment on the presentation. And then my other comment is the deforestation. You showed a picture from 2007, which is 11 years ago. We're currently in 2018. While I could appreciate the two, I would have preferred to see a 2018 picture for us to see if the damage has continued, if it has improved. You know, it's like, is something being hid here, and why aren't we having the complete discussion? And then my final comment, before you respond to those, has to do with editorial in the Amandala by former Boundary Commissioner Lindsay Belisle. And he's showing the treaty. The first thing that I keep hearing is that the first thing that they look at is the treaties. But then he said here, the 1859 treaty does not give title to Belize's 8,867 square miles. It is therefore very clear that what Belizeans are being told by the referendum unit and the yes to the ICJ proponents is grossly inaccurate. I therefore hereby invite the referendum unit, intellectuals, and the yes to the ICJ proponents to dispute or rubbish any of the facts presented in this article and to let the Belizean people know the truth about the 1859 treaty and the supporting 1861 treaty map, that they are not ironclad documents that correctly describe and define our borders and give us title to the 8,867 square miles we call Belize. Part of the article also says, before presenting the facts, I want to categorically state that the 1859 treaty does not describe the boundaries of the 8,867 square miles of our mainland territory we call Belize. In fact, the 1859 treaty describes only some 6,700 square miles, or about 75% of our mainland territory. So I'd like to hear your comments on those, please.
On the last one first. On the last one first. I'm sorry you must have missed the beginning of my presentation, where I showed Schedule 1 of the Constitution of Belize, which provides very clearly that our borders with Guatemala are defined by the 1859 treaty and our borders with Mexico by the 1893 treaty with Mexico. Nobody is saying that only the 1859 treaty marks our entire boundaries. It's a pity that that's not included there. But clearly, that is something that we all learn in school. We don't even have to go to school that we know we have boundaries with Mexico. I think that is elemental knowledge. We don't need to start to argue about whether 1859 alone describes our entire boundaries. Of course, the boundary with Mexico is also described by the 1893 treaty. I think that's something that is, I didn't know I needed to emphasize that. And in the respect of the Sarstoon, I don't know where you got your information from. I don't know that General Ortega or any past general of the BDF has to ask permission to anybody from Guatemala to go to Guatemala. I would want to know your source, because that is not what the BDF says. I don't know if the authorities of the Ministry of Defense are here. But I suppose what you're doing is repeating hearsay. And if you're repeating hearsay, I can't argue with you. If you want to believe that, I'm sorry, you are repeating what, like I said, the Guatemalans would love for all of us to think that the Sarstoon belonged to them. I've been to the Sarstoon many times. As far as I know, our authorities don't have to ask permission of no one. And they do patrol the Sarstoon every day. Now, the forward operating base was placed there 2 years ago. The problems with Guatemala in the Sarstoon started more than 2 years ago. So if you are suggesting that our BDF is afraid or anything, I think they're not. In the face of this problem, they went to establish a permanent posting there. So I'm not sure where you get your information. And then the next point was, there were 3 points you had? What about the deforestation? Oh, the picture. I'm sorry if I don't have one newer picture. I did ask our friends from the conservation people, but I haven't gotten one. But indications are that it has gotten a bit worse since then. It ebbs and flows, you know, during the dry season, in Belize at least. In Belize, it ebbs and flows. During the dry season, you have more incursions and more clearing of land and so forth. The last we heard from FCD, for example, who are present in the Chiquibul, their report was that it has stabilized to some extent, but the big problem now is cattle farming. And that the people from the other side, you have this phenomenon in Petén called ganaderia. That is narco cattle farming, right? Where the people who are involved in the drug trade wash their money, they launder it by buying land and by having cattle and so forth. So it's a big problem in Petén, and if we're not careful, it'll spread out into Belize. It's just another phenomenon like the others that are moving in our direction.
Hello. Hi. Sorry. I just have a question or kind of a comment.
I can't see you. Oh, all right.
Yes. Some of the opponents or the people who would like the Belizean public to vote no, they've been describing some cases from the ICJ. I think specifically one would be Peru and Chile, where one of the countries had lost territory to the other based on the ICJ ruling. Now, I just want to know if you guys during your presentation, I don't recall seeing it here, if you could show a clear difference between nations that have gone to the ICJ and lost, and so that they can see, so that we can see that, okay, for those particular cases, there was reasons why the ICJ voted one way as opposed to the other, and how Belize's case to the ICJ would be different, and we won't basically have a fear of falling into that same category. That's it.
Thank you for that. Like the two cases, examples I showed you, we were not here to discuss case law, but the two cases I showed you, there was a winner and a loser. Libya, Chad, Libya lost. Libya was claiming land that the court determined belonged to Chad, and the reason Libya lost is because the court determined that there was a boundary treaty, even though, according to Libya, that treaty had expired. And in the case of Indonesia and Malaysia, Indonesia lost because Indonesia's claim was based on historic title, and the court determined that historic title don't count for anything under international law system that we operate in. In the case you refer to, Chile, Peru, I know there's this thing going around like a meme that people put together, and the headline says, Chile lost sea to Peru, and they drew a new, the ICJ drew a new border. And if they had read the case, people would know that Chile's position was that they claimed that Peru and Chile had agreed a boundary up to 200 miles in the sea. Yeah? That was Chile's position. And Peru said, no, we never agreed with Chile such a boundary. And Chile maintained it and had their warships there and so forth. And eventually they went to the ICJ. And the ICJ did what I told you the ICJ would do. First thing the ICJ wants to look at is treaties. So it says, Chile, what is your position? Chile said, well, we had agreed already 200 miles of territorial boundaries, maritime boundaries. And the court said, all right, show me the agreement. And Chile could not show an agreement to substantiate its claim to a 200-mile boundary in the sea. And the court did what it had to do. It said, if you don't have a treaty to show your claim, then I can't support you. And that is how you get that headline that said, Chile lost. You can't lose what you don't have. So it depends who wrote the article, right? It depends who interpreted it. The Chileans, of course, were not upset because they wanted 200 miles of maritime delimitation in a certain direction, and the court said, no, under international law, it has to be in this direction. So you have, every case you look at, you'll have winners and losers in the sense that if your case is valid under international law, the court will support you, and if it's not, it will just dismiss you totally and outright. So yeah, we could have another, I would volunteer to have another session just looking at the case laws. Another example that people distort, a lot of distortions, Nigeria, Cameroon, right? They say, look how Nigeria lost the Bakassi from, to Cameroon. And it was based on a simple fact that there was an established boundary agreement that said this is the boundary of Cameroon and Nigeria. And within that boundary, Bakassi fell. Even though Nigeria said, but we have thousands and thousands of people living there, so it must be ours. Court said, no, boundaries, once established by agreement, have a life of their own. You can't change it. So you have many cases like that, and it's on that basis that we can say that on the basis of the law and evidence, we have very, very good title to all our land, islands, and sea. I'm taking too long to answer, Joe.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I have several questions. First, I'm sorry I missed your presentation due to work. I'm a public officer and attorney. I have several questions. I'll ask you two. The first is, maybe you said it in your presentation and I missed it, but I would like to know, is this case, if the two countries' majority voters vote yes to the ICJ, is the case of Guatemala versus Belize where we are respondent? Or is it a Belize versus Guatemala where Guatemala is the respondent? Or is it Guatemala versus Belize, their case, and we have our case, Belize versus Guatemala? Because in my opinion, when you're in the position of a respondent, you're already in a, you have to already be in a defensive position. But we could have also brought our case, Belize versus Guatemala, for the infringement of our boundaries, and all the issues will come up. Well, what is the boundary between the two countries, land boundary, maritime boundary, and all the other issues? For me, I'm inclined to vote no. I would be inclined to vote yes if several of my questions are answered satisfactorily, and this is one of them. Is it the two countries bringing their separate cases, or is it we will answer a case brought by Guatemala? That's the first question. Second question is, and again, your response is, or whatever is the response of government that as a voter, that is what impacts me to decide whether I vote yes or no. The next question is, clearly we will need to hire international lawyers to present our case or to defend our position. But what will be put in place to supervise or to monitor or to know what these lawyers will be presenting and doing? Because when we go to doctors, we like to give the doctors control over our health and what's not. Same way when people go to lawyers, they think the lawyers know all the answer. As a lawyer, I'm telling you we don't. And a good client will be step to step with their attorneys to make sure they understand clearly what their attorneys are doing. They ask questions. They give their view as to how they want their case to go. So my question is there a team of attorneys, of people who have studied international law, foreign people who have done international relations? Will there be put together a team that will work with these international lawyers, and a very good team? So those are two of my many questions, and I would like to know how can I send other questions, and if there will be reply to those questions. As I said, I have many questions, and depending on how they're answered, that influences my vote. Thank you.
The procedure going to court has been established under the special agreement. The clock, if we go to court, the clock starts ticking on the day both countries have already registered their submission to the court for this case under the special agreement. From that day, Guatemala has 30 days to present their case, their claim. 1 year, sorry, not 30 days, 1 year. From that 30 days, they have 1 year to present their memorial. And after that 1 year, Belize has 1 year to present its own position, to present its position. So you're talking about 2 years now. Once we present our own counter memorial, Guatemala responds to our submission, and they have 6 months to respond to that. That's 2 years and a half. And then once Guatemala responds to our submission, then we have 6 months to respond to Guatemalans. In effect, it makes it 3 years of written arguments, after which the court then sets dates for oral arguments. And the oral arguments are presented, we expect it would be over a period of 1 year, 2 years, so we're talking about 5 years before the court makes its decision, because they also normally have to visit the places and so forth. In respect of our preparations, we have had the international law firm Freshfields, Brookhouse and Derringer since 2007. Before that, we had Sir Eli Lotto Pact and a whole team of lawyers. And today, we still have a whole team of lawyers around this law firm. And they have been engaged with us. I mean, the legal arguments have been studied and written, and the historical evidence has been researched so extensively that we have a mountain load of all the evidence, and we have exactly where to find them and so forth. We have the legal opinion. I don't know if you have seen it. The legal opinion prepared by a team of international lawyers headed by Sir Eli Lotto Pact, one of the foremost international lawyers in the world, accompanied by a president, an ex-president of the ICJ, still alive, Judge Schwebel. In fact, we were just in touch with him a few days ago. And another fellow who is the world's foremost international expert in the law of treaties and jurisprudence, Shabtai Rozan, an Israeli judge, jurist, and then Francisco Vicuña Ortego, who is a Chilean international law expert. So we've had a team of international lawyers guiding us every step of the way and being there at our disposal whenever we need them. And we continue to have them through the firm Freshfields Brookhouse International. I invite you to look at their website. It's one of the oldest law firms in the world, one of the biggest law firms in the world.